Alex, it's so wonderful to have you. I'm so grateful that you've agreed to be on our podcast, and it's great to meet you and to see you with Mick and I for the next hour or so as we go into some ideas around what it's like to be a politician in 2025, and some of the intersections between therapy and politics and your experiences. I'll just start with a bit of a bio, if that's okay. So you were born and raised in Leeds, the only British MP whose family comes from Israel. Your father was in the Israeli military. He fought in the 1976 war and immediately joined the peace
67.
movement. Thank
67.
you. Thank you. 67. And immediately joined the peace movement after the war. You attended anti-fascist and environmental protests as a teenager. And then in terms of more recently, so you're a former city councillor. You ran Social Enterprise Yorkshire and the Humber for 8 years before becoming an MP in 2017. And you were the shadow minister for nature recovery and the domestic environment from 2021 to 2023. So it's just wonderful to talk to someone like you for our podcast. So I wonder if we could just start with your experience as an MP. So from kind of becoming an MP in the first place, where your motivations came from, and then sitting in the House of Commons as a newly elected politician. Like, what was that journey like for you?
Sure. I mean, it's a long journey. So I suppose it started. You sort of mentioned it in my bio. When I was a student, I was involved in environmental campaigning, anti-fascist action, and then later on in campaigning against introduction of tuition fees for higher education students. And in that activity, you go and lobby your MP, and although I wasn't thinking about it straight away, I was a bit like, have to go and ask this other person to go and to this other place to ask for this thing, and rather than being an advocate for it, even though being an MP is still basically an advocate, why can't I be the decision maker? Why can't I be the legislator? Why can't I? So that was sort of led me to look at. Well, I knew what my politics were, the closest affinity to them, which is the Labour Party, and so I joined the Labour Party. I'm just putting these on just for a second. Uh, Joined the Labour Party, and then sort of the journey really was just as an activist to begin with, but all the sort of my professional career, although my degree was in computing, my professional career was in communities, mainly in regeneration, and um, so the I had like quite a parallel existence with, particularly with local politicians, a bit less with members of parliament, but still a little bit, and with ministers in that area. And so over the years, obviously, I developed relationships. I became active within the Labour Party, the trade union movement, civil society more generally through work and voluntary activities, and that led me first to being a councillor, like you said, in 2012, and then to being an MP in 2017. But I took on, the seat, although if you look at it on paper now, and it's a different seat with a different name from the last election, when I took it on, the previous candidate in 2010 had come third. So it wasn't some seat that had been Labour forever and you knew you were going to become an MP. This was a difficult, tough constituency where actually lots of people, when I took it on for the 2015 election, which I didn't win, said Labour will never win this seat again. It's nice for you to have a go, but it's not really. But I didn't believe that. I looked at the seat and the people. I'd lived here for a long time. From actually I was born in this current constituency, so I had a real affinity and real feeling for the constituency. So that's sort of the journey, really.
Yeah, thanks for giving that's that whole journey. And I'm curious, kind of the impact of that as part of your career on your mental health and your mental well-being. I imagine it's quite a big thing to represent your community where you've grown up from, but I mean,
Well, I
we
mean,
know that politics is quite a toxic place at times, and I'm curious about that.
yeah. I mean, any involvement in politics, there's an element of stress in your mental health. So being a candidate is stressful as well. Election campaigns are stressful. Being a councillor, particularly if you're a portfolio holder, which I was, is stressful. And then being an MP to an extent is even more stressful, a little bit less on the decision making, more on the public exposure side. There are lots of angles to it which create stress and stress in your mental health. And I think being an MP, there's some, particularly if you're a member of parliament you're not able to go back to where you live slash represent from parliament every night. So you effectively, half the week you are away and on your own. Obviously not on your own in parliament, but still in some senses it is, can be a lonelyish place, and can be a hostile place. And then obviously half a week back and it's also discombobulating. It took me years to stop being discombobulated. You wake up in the morning. Most people wake up in the morning and know where they are. That is not necessarily the case. You're an MP. You could be in London, you could be at home, you could be, particularly if you're on a select committee or some other body which involves a lot of foreign travel, you could be in a hotel somewhere else in the world. And that creates, and I know there's lots of people in other professions who have that similar challenge, but so you've got, so you've got all of these different things, and I think that everything now is supercharged by social media as well. So it's about your relationship with social media. My relationship with social media has definitely changed in the 7 years I've been an MP, and I've probably got a more healthy relationship with it now. But it can be an utterly debilitating thing, because you go on and you read sometimes hundreds of comments about you, and I can tell you, when it's hundreds of comments, they're definitely not positive. So that, I mean, there aren't many people who can get through that without any impact on their mental health, even if it's just a short-term impact. Yeah.
Can I ask,
And you,
Alex? I mean, what's that like, Alex? Like reading loads of comments from people that you don't know saying really negative things about you.
I mean, it's worse when you read them from people you do know. I'll tell you that, Mick. Yeah, the ones you don't know, you can sort of, particularly from sock puppet accounts, or I do a lot on international human rights, and so there's a lot of sock puppet accounts from some of these oppressive autocratic regimes. I quite enjoy those because I feel like I'm getting something done then. But when it's real people, particularly constituents, people you've met, people people who know you, actually who know you and your values and your views, then they're attacking you for a vote in parliament, particularly where it's where you haven't voted. Like, so they presume that the reason you haven't voted is because you don't believe in the thing, where it might be you might be ill, you might be on a foreign trip, it could be anything. So there's a whole range of things, and I think particularly where you haven't said something about something, or you haven't done something, where there's an absence. And there's lots of good reasons for that, because a lot of the time, and I could give an example I could give a very good example of this, to be honest, but a lot of the times it's because you're working on it in the background in private, you're working from it, you don't going to resolve the issue you're talking about, going on social media and talking about everything you're doing about it is actually going to stop you getting it resolved rather than help you getting it resolved. But people obviously don't understand that. So I mean, the biggest thing that I've done to safeguard my mental health in terms of social media, and I have to say X is the most toxic platform, but I think everybody knows that already. Or it might soon be joined by TikTok, from what we're hearing in the US at the moment. Is to read it a lot less. And then also, and this is actually quite a recent thing, to restrict who can comment on posts, and also to not respond to people. Very occasionally now I'll respond. Very occasionally. You put something out, it's a broadcast media, although obviously it's not, but treat it like a broadcast media. If you go and do a TV interview, you wouldn't go back in the interview half an hour later and start shouting at the interviewer, would you? That's not how it works. You do the interview, you go home. That's it. So that's sort of how I try and deal with social media now, and that has helped.
it's fascinating, thank you. And I'm curious, like, how it works, like with the other MPs. Like, do you find lots of empathy? Like, obviously they're going through some of the similar challenges, but is there a good working culture, and is there understanding amongst MPs, maybe from different parties, that of working together, or how does that work?
I think the thing about, actually, in some ways, it's easy to be at different parties, because you are in opposing parties, and then the only times you work with somebody is when you agree on the issue. So if you and your counterpart in whatever other party it is are on a different side of an issue, you're not going to work together on it, because you obviously disagree, right? So you only really work with people on issues where you do agree. And actually, I've this fun. This happened fairly recently. I've started on international issues, and actually on international issues, there's generally more consensus. Although that's not entirely the case on everything. But I've been working with Ian Duncan Smith a lot on human rights issues. And actually, if you told me 10 years ago that Ian Duncan Smith was some great, support of human rights, I'd have said you were joking. But like, obviously, I think people it's quite well known about China. But quite a number of other things. I was at an event with him the other day in terms of the autonomous northeast Syria, which is a Kurdish area, and another minority area of North Syria, which has been independent for 10 years now, right through the Assad regime. Obviously, things have changed recently. And then I work with him on quite a number of international human rights issues. So there is that. But in your own party, it actually sometimes is you've got a lot of people who are your friends. That is absolutely true. And you sort of, and people who, in the new intake, even there's people who I've been friends with for a long time. And obviously in my own intake and other intakes, I was a councillor before, so obviously I know the other MPs, longest standing Leeds. I was a councillor in another MP's constituency, obviously very close to him, and that's all great. And so you can, and who to go to for support, but not everybody is supportive in your own party. And there is an element of competition as well, internal competition, because, there are jobs everybody wants, and actually for those jobs you are only competing with people in your own party. If you want to be a select committee chair, that is allocated to a party, and then people from that party run for select committee chair. If you want to be a minister in the government, then that is just your own party. So although there isn't, that's an appointment, and there isn't, but there is always a little bit of that competition, like in a company. Like, I suppose if you're in a company, it's a little bit like that. If you're in a company, you've got a competitive company, you probably don't have personal relationships that much with your competitors, but you do within your own company, and you have competition, internal competition. So it's a similar sort of thing, I suppose.
I wonder if something in that of being the ruling party, being one of the biggest parties in the UK, there's so many people and so much competition. And I'm curious, kind of, I suppose, back to mental well-being in general, are there systemic issues that you see as that politics is always going to suffer from some of these challenges, and kind of the support's never going to be what it could be, maybe?
No, I mean, I think I was going to make this point a bit later, but I might make it now. So first of all, I think our parliament and the way it operates is archaic. And everybody goes, oh, it's the Westminster model. We have a Westminster Foundation for Democracy where we try and talk to other people about the Westminster model and adopting the Westminster model, from emerging democracies, if you want to put it that way. And I'm a bit like, well, we need to, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but we need to update our own model. If you're going to start from somewhere, you wouldn't start from where we are in Westminster. No new legislature has a chamber like ours, where it's like very clear opponents, where there isn't enough room for the entire legislature to sit, and there isn't a designated seat for you as a legislator. It's like first come, first serve. PMQs, there are on our side, not so much on the opposition side, there are quite a lot of people that can't get a seat where you can, what we call bob for questions. There's another thing, bobbing for questions. That's like nobody else in the world does that. And then our hours are not family friendly. Monday's a particularly bad example, and there's a logic to Mondays. We start at 2:30, and the logic there is that people would want to travel from their constituencies on a Monday, so you've got to give them time to do that. But we finish at 10, so, and starting at 2:30 doesn't mean that your working day starts at 2:30. It means you basically have a working day, if you include travel, from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. And there are times, although not at the moment, but particularly during Brexit, where 10 p.m. wasn't 10 p.m., it could be 2 a.m. So that's not a great working environment. Then you've got to be back again the following morning. I'm sure the European Working Time Directive probably got hammering during Brexit in Parliament, but it wasn't implemented. So that it's not a family-friendly place. We've had a little win recently where some of the half terms, particularly October, but even other ones, February, there's some school areas where the half term doesn't line up with the parliamentary recess. I'm lucky it does in Leeds, but particularly if you're a single parent, what do you do with your children? if that's your, because if you're a single parent, a separated relationship, and family separation is also quite common. We can talk about that in Westminster, and that again is something that I've gone through fairly recently. So these are all things that add to difficulty, and the system's not really built for it. So, and it particularly affects our London MPs, like I say, because you don't go home every night, and so you don't see your children every day. It's not a normal working environment. So, and the other thing I'd say is, and I think again, I think politics is quite conducive to this, and it attracts politics attracts sort of people, but I'm not sure Parliament's conducive to it. There is a lot of neurodiversity in Parliament. Vast majority of which is undiagnosed. you know, and I think there's probably a lot of undiagnosed neurodiversity just generally all around society. But I think maybe politicians don't, there's that whole thing about, stigma and all of that. So you don't want to admit it, so you don't go for a diagnosis and all of that, or you're just too busy. And then obviously we have a system which isn't really very helpful, which we as politicians should be trying to fix. I think, which we are trying to fix it, but there's a huge backlog of particularly ADHD diagnosis, adult ADHD services, awful. But there's definitely a lot of ADHD in Parliament. You can just tell it in meetings, and I didn't realise this. I didn't know the signs or the symptoms or anything. But then I was one of the founding members and vice chair of the All Parliamentary Group on ADHD, and you sat in meetings talking to experts and meeting people with ADHD, lived experience, and you were like, there's something here. And I didn't realise it all these years, and now it's becoming quite clear what's going on. And then you start seeing it in other people. And Parliament's, I've been to see the health, it's not really cottoned onto it, our health services in Parliament. Although for physical health, they're really good. Probably the only place in the country you can get a GP appointment in half an hour. So, but mental health again and neurodiversity, like everywhere else, lagging.
So can you talk more about just specifically? So there's a mental health service for politicians, but it's just not great.
No,
or okay,
there is a GP service.
Okay.
For
Right.
politicians in Parliament, and it is
Okay.
like every other GP service in the country.
Right.
And if you need specialist service, it will refer you, and you can work on that. But they aren't your primary GP, and they can't be, I don't think. So they have to obviously work with your GP back home, and that obviously makes things a bit more complicated. But to be honest, if you're an MP, you're much more likely to have time to see the GP in Parliament than you are the GP in your constituency. So if you're out of London, I keep going on about that. If you're an out of London MP, yeah.
Alex, can I ask you, because there's so many, I think, really important things that you're saying there, but it sounds like part of it is that Parliament really isn't set up for kind of normal, not normal, but kind of for everybody in a way that can really represent people where there's, as you say, separated relationships, separated families, people with neurodiversity. It's a kind of archaic model that doesn't allow it to really represent the kind of scope of the population.
I think that's right. And I'm not saying it's the only workplace by any means, but there's structural issues, yeah. And we've obviously got two chambers. The other chamber is a bit less of an issue because the age profile, particularly on the children and families, is much older. But now we're getting younger peers as well, so they sit even later, and it's not a proper job, if you like, because they don't get a salary, they just get an attendance allowance. So both chambers have this problem, will increasingly have this problem, for instance, because they're getting rid of hereditary peers and they replace those with appointed peers. So it's a parliament. It is parliament problem, an increasing parliament problem. The new intake is a much higher level of people with school age children than I've experienced in Parliament. So and this is a very partisan point I'm about to make, but in the Labour Party, I don't know anybody who sends their children to school where they board at the school. While in the previous Parliament, we had the majority of MPs were Conservative MPs. Not a lot of them didn't. A lot of them went to state schools. I'm not saying did, but there were quite a lot of their children boarded, and that is quite different in terms of your care needs for your children if they are at boarding school than if they are at a normal, mine go to actual comprehensive school, so yeah.
And as you said, if you're a single parent, then it really makes it
Yeah.
difficult.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to negotiate between two parents. You know, you need family support. Holidays where Parliament is sitting is difficult. You know, they do, like, you know, in some senses they do try and accommodate you. So the accommodation allowance, and again, this is where you get, so the other side of it, where you get pressure from your constituents. One pressure from constituents is, you know, is expenses. Um, they do give you an increased accommodation allowance, so you can rent somewhere big enough for your children to stay for those holidays, which again is a bit funny, because if you think about it, you know, my kids will probably be in my London flat 3 or 4 weeks a year, maybe a bit more, and one of those weeks will be in recess anyway. You know, so I will probably do some parliamentary type things in London while I'm there, but Parliament won't be sitting. Um, and that's, you know, and that's the whole across the whole year. So that doesn't seem like a very good use of money. But how else do you do it? And then you get constituents going, oh, you know, none of the other, no, that's not true anymore. But the word was a period where none of the other MPs in London, in Leeds, sorry, had children who lived in Leeds, and so it was a bit like, what, your accommodation allowance is a lot higher than all the others. Why is that? Why can't you spend X MP is like a third, two third, no, not a third, two-thirds of yours. Why is yours so much higher? And it's because I've got children who live in, like, you like the fact that my children go to the same school as your children, but you don't like that. You don't like the fact that my accommodation allowance is high. You know, it's like, you know, it's, people want to have everything both ways, don't they? So you get a bit of pressure on that sort of thing, you know.
And I imagine just being a dad and having to do half your week in London and half in Leeds, that must
Yeah,
be just so much traveling and just spending time away
that's true.
from quite a lot.
And although it's not anymore, to be honest, but at
Okay.
the beginning it was hard for my kids as well. You know,
Mm.
2015 or 2017, like, I can't remember which election it was, and they, like I said, they go to mixed intake comprehensive school, and the school takes kids from quite a wide, you know, area, a lead. So the other children that live in the constituency, and particularly those that went to the same primary school, some other local primary schools, and my children, absolutely not an issue. Doesn't matter. Kids who live miles away, particularly from more disadvantaged communities, an election would see all of these placards. And my name is not Smith, so it was like, "Is that your dad?" And they were like, "Yeah." And they were like, and it'd be, you know, they get bullied for it. And then you hear a lot about, you know, when things happen with MPs and press stories. It's, you know, that really hasn't happened to me, thankfully. But you know, but that sort of, that has an impact on your family, and public exposure, all the stresses and strains of being an MP, public engagements, being away, all that. You know, there is a very high level of family separation in Parliament. I know that 42, I think it's the figure, isn't it? 42% of marriages end in divorce. I'm not sure whether we're higher or lower in Parliament than anybody's done a study, but we're certainly potentially over the national average. You know, it seems like a lot to me compared to my peer group. Parliament seems very high level of separation compared to my peer group outside of Parliament.
Do you think that's because of the stress or and the distance and the
I,
separation?
I think it's everything, and also I think, if I'm honest, being an MP and not being an MP isn't a bit like, well, I had this job and now I've been promoted, I'm now the manager, or I had this job and then I've got this other job in another rival company, or, you know, in a different hospital or whatever. It is completely different. You know, there's very few things you transition from to be an MP where you're like, well, this is more or less the same as what I was doing before. It is not the same as being a councillor. It is 100% not the same as being a councillor. Um, and and that changes your mindset, your mentality. You know, it's sort of, you know, people, as you go through life, and experiences and circumstance, their environment, you know, shapes them. It's not just children. I think it's all the way through life. I mean, this is probably an area of expertise for you rather than for me, but that's my view. And I think being an MP has a very fundamental change. And then your relationship, obviously, with your partner changes because you're different. Everything's different, you know. So it's difficult. It just is.
And I wonder when, so obviously we start as an MP and then you become a shadow minister, you chair an all party parliamentary group. I'm guessing that's just extra challenge, extra time pressures, and just
Yeah,
it just all adds
normally.
up.
Yeah. I think if you're a minister, then definitely. Shadow minister a bit, not quite as much as a minister. But with shadow minister, it's more going on visits. There's more travel. There's more time away. I was actually lucky. I have to say, my shadow minister, because I did two. So I did the one you mentioned, the nature recovery. But before that, I did tourism and heritage and some other things in DCMS. So I was on the front bench for nearly the entirety of Keir Starmer's time as leader of the opposition. But one of the things that I did in terms of my portfolio was zoos. So first, the zoos as a visitor attraction, and then secondly, from an animal welfare perspective. And so I went to a lot of zoos. It's a bit unfair on children for your parent to go to a zoo and not take your children. So I always took my children to the zoo, including my younger son being zookeeper for a day at London Zoo while I was meeting the chief exec, and my older son was in that meeting as well. But my younger son wants to be a zoologist now. So you can say it's like, it's like it's not all negative. I think if I hadn't been to like 15 zoos and nearly the same number of aquariums, and he hadn't been to all of those with me all around the country, not sure this would now be the case. So there are positive factors as well, and they've had lots of I have to say they had lots of experiences that other children wouldn't have had and been taken to things I certainly wouldn't have got anywhere near. They've been gone to music festivals, and and as shadow tourism minister, I got invited to lots of great things, and there was like out with a guest, and you sometimes say, well, I've got two children. They say, yes, fine, bring both your children. And so they've been and experienced things, and it's certainly awakened them. And one of the international human rights things to do is around West Papua. My oldest son's now in sixth form at the local sixth form college, and he's doing an EPQ, and his EPQ subject is, are international politicians doing enough for human rights in West Papua? I feel like there's a bit of side eye there, but fair enough. He's been to a lot of West Papua meetings. He had to come with me to Brussels and to The Hague to go on international ones. We even went to Australia to restart the Australian West Papuan group, and he was sat in a number of officers in Canberra in the Parliament there. We got a taste for Tim Tams, which is like the Australian penguin, but much superior. So it does rub off on kids as well sometimes positively. I'm not saying it's all it'd be wrong for me to say it's all negative. Yeah.
But I guess there is a pressure as a politician. There's an expectation that you're kind of perfect, that you're faultless. And I imagine what you were saying earlier about, when people are picking up on things, that must be, you're not expected to be human. And, what's been lovely, Alex, listening to you is about talking about the real human, you as a dad and your life. But that's not a side we see. And that doesn't feel healthy that, the people leading the country is supposed to be something other than everybody else.
Yeah, I think actually it's helpful that that politicians get the opportunity to do things like this. I've done a few, although not on the national media, and we should try and humanize politicians. And a lot of politicians are really actually amazing people with great personalities, and people say, oh, politicians aren't what they used to be, and they used to have a backstory and all of this, and you think, well, that's maybe because they were given more of an opportunity to communicate that, and there's less opportunity now. So I definitely think that. I mean, I think the other thing around this is that when you're a politician, there's nowhere to hide. Like if you do a job and you make a mistake, then what might happen is about it, your manager might find out about it. It's a private process. There might be disciplinary. There might be a bit of HR involved. That's probably it. Yeah, it's not going to be on the front of a newspaper, is it? It's do the same thing as an MP. It's a public story. It's all over. Journalists are sniffing. It's on social media. All of that. And actually, we've seen a good example recently where somebody does something in their previous job, which was private, and there were repercussions internally in that job, but didn't really have much of an effect on her. But then 10 years later, it all comes through again, even after she's gone in the government, and she has to resign over it. So even things that happen privately in a private job, then as a politician, have repercussion years later, which seems utterly ridiculous. And I think to a lot of people in the public will seem utterly ridiculous as well. So it's difficult. It's difficult. And I think sometimes applications of standards is very mixed. I think it has, a lot of us feel like that on the inside as well.
And I guess it works the other way around as well, is that if you make a mistake as an MP and then you leave Parliament, and then everyone knows who you were as an MP, and finding a job after that when they know a lot about you.
There was a story in the Telegraph today talking to 3 ex-Conservative MPs about how they couldn't find any work, and there's a sort of broader tale there, I think, as well, because that's not one of them. It might be a bit about them personally, but the other two, it's probably more about the fact they were Conservative MPs. Now, like I'm obviously a Labour MP, but I don't think Conservative MPs should be permanently jobless. That's not, they've got skill. Like particularly one of them was a select committee chair for 12 years. That is, that's a huge amount of skills and useful utilisation that somebody should take hold of. Yeah.
I wonder if we could just focus just for a moment on Leeds specifically, in this wonderful constituency that we live in. What's it like to be in a Yorkshire seat, obviously so far from London, still in a kind of an urban environment, similar to Westminster, but to be in the north and to be so outside of that Westminster bubble for at least half the week, and have constituencies with quite different issues as well.
Yeah, I think it's really useful. I think I really feel, and people obviously can disagree, that I'm actually like the average person in my own constituency. I really feel that. We've got a lot, not quite 40,000 students live in the constituency. So a lot of students, a lot of people that work in the universities or in the public sector, or in the voluntary sector, a lot of whom studied at the university before. We've got a lot of people that live in flats. I live in a flat. We've got a lot of people that that have got very sort of progressive liberal values. That majority, I would say, that's and if you look at the electoral results, that sort of gives that feel as well. It's also quite and this was certainly the evidence from the EU referendum, quite pro-European place, quite an internationalist place. And we've actually had some data from Duke of Edinburgh. Actually did the research where actually the demographics came out that we're very internationalist sort of constituency, which I thought was really interesting. And young people in the constituency really internationalist, and it is a very young constituency as well. And it's the sort of people are passionate about things like music and culture, and and those are all sort of things that I'm deeply, involved in. My mailbag, people write to me about this, and I shouldn't get annoyed about this, but like people have been writing to me recently, these emails are like, we want you to do this. And usually we wouldn't do this because this amendment or this event has been, has been organised by this MP. I've been getting them with my own name on quite a lot recently. I'm like, do my constituents not realise that this is me? Can they not see my name? Why are they emailing me saying, can you sign this amendment tabled by Alex Sobel? I'm like that is me. That's really obviously me. So, actually, that's fine. But, it just sort of, it reinforces that thing. So when I'm here, I feel a lot better about things. And now I've got the city centre, with that, it's got, obviously we've got the LGI there, and the universities on the edge of the city centre, which are now in my constituency, and the business community there, and then obviously the nighttime economy and the retail economy, and the markets and everything else. So it's like feels very vibrant as well. I mean, it was not that it wasn't before, but it's like just it's really given that feel. And so I think I'm really lucky to have this constituency, or to represent this constituency. And it means that I don't really have any rural areas. So like before, I used to speak on rural issues for the Labour Party in opposition, but I had rural areas. Now I don't. I've sort of banked that. I banked that knowledge and that representation going forward, but I don't really now. I can take all of those issues, and articulate them in London. And I've that thing, actually, I don't feel particularly when I'm in London that like I'm in like an alien place, and it's like very, different. I'm in an urban major city. I think it's doing Leeds down to say, oh no, it's nothing like London, because that's not true. What I say is, in London you might have 8 examples of whatever it is. In Leeds you might only have 1 or 2. Still got it. We still have major art gallery, major museum, whatever it is, and we're developing more. Like, I'm very involved in developing the National Poetry Centre with Simon Armitage, the poet laureate. London hasn't got a poet laureate, Leeds has got a poet laureate. So, and to a lesser extent, British Library in the North. So, we already have a British Library in Leeds at Boston Spa, it's just not publicly accessible. So Leeds has all of these national institutions in the city, regional institutions. It has that variety. It's just about that. It's about articulating that as well. It's also about being an advocate, an ambassador. And I think also we're very lucky now. We've got a mayor, a metro mayor, which helps us a lot, being showcasing, Yorkshire to the world, West Yorkshire to the world. So I think that I'm really proud of the place. It's just about making sure everybody else realise how great a place it is, because internationally, particularly, maybe not nationally, there might be one or two other cities that may be slightly better known. I'm not talking about London. I mean, obviously London's capital city, but other cities outside London may be better known than Leeds, which I think is a bit unfair on Leeds. So, I always push Leeds. We were in a meeting yesterday because I chair the music group in Parliament. Music's really important to me. We're talking to a new emerging what they call music streaming service, so not one of the big ones everybody knows, but an emerging one. And I was talking about, because I want to get them involved in the Mercury Music Prize, and I said, well, the Mercury Music Prize Album of the Year competition run by the British Phonographic Institute. Last year we had 3 Leeds artists nominated for the prize, and the winner English teacher is a band from my district. I call it, because they're Americans, they call it districts, and that's that's a great thing. And then I was talking about streaming revenues. So one of the big issues for artists, I'm going slightly off tangent here, this is a very ADHD sort of bit. So one of the issues for musicians and artists is that they're not getting sufficient remuneration from streaming services. But the person that's the biggest advocate for that, the chair of the Ivor Academy, is Tom Gray, who was in the band Gomez, who I first knew when he lived at St Mark's Flats, the University of Leeds. So, so I even managed to, and that's obviously my constituency as well. And I know Tom, we were at university at the same time. So, so it's like, it just gives this impression to these Americans. They're like, wow. Like, he's talked about the winner of the Mercury Music Prize, so about the guy that's doing the remuneration work. I was like, oh, have you heard of Corinne Bailey-Rae? They're like, oh, yeah, Corinne, because she's big in America. So they got this feel like we were like Nashville by the end of it, or Memphis. So it's like, so it's like about that. It's about like knowing what there is in the city, knowing what's been in the city, knowing what people are interested in, what you can articulate, and getting them interested in Leeds, getting people to Leeds, And I'm like with cultural industries, I'm really good at that, because we've got, Leeds and West Yorkshire to maybe a greater extent. There isn't an area, whether it's music, whether it's poetry, whether it's art, whether it's literature, where we have not got an absolutely brilliant cell. We can say at least 3 names. They'll be all like, wow, these are like world class. Some of them are dead, obviously. The Bronte sisters are not going to come and turn up at an event now. But that people are like, yeah, that's incredible. And I say, oh, you can come and you can visit, Haworth, for the Parsonage Museum, where you can go to see the Hepworth in Wakefield, or the Henry Moore Institute here, or you can come and hear the Poet Laureate speak, or you can come to the Broodnell Social Club, and I went to see Tom Jones there a couple of years ago, and I'm going to Femi Kuti next week, and so you got this, you can make this amazing sell to people, and I think that's really important. I'm not sure that's quite legislative for Westminster, but that's like part of the job as well, being an MP, is advocating for your area.
Well, you make me feel proud to live here, and if we see lots of TaSC people moving to Leeds, we'll know why. Thank you. I wanted to also ask about being a Jewish MP, because I know you read a fascinating article with Layla Moran about you yourself having family from Israel, and she had family from Palestine, and kind of coming together. And I'm just curious, like, what's it like being a Jewish member of Parliament? Like, have you faced anti-Semitism like in Westminster, and kind of what's your experience been from that?
I wouldn't. I mean, you face anti-Semitism in society. Direct, like, anti-Semitism is a complicated thing. Direct anti-Semitism, when somebody says something anti-Semitic or an anti-Semitic trope to your face in a meeting or an event or something, that has definitely not happened to me in Westminster. Where you feel that maybe you haven't progressed or things haven't happened because of that, that may have been a factor in the 2017 to 2019 Parliament. So, and there were certainly lots of conversations about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and we had a very well publicised debate about it where I wasn't actually given the opportunity to speak. So, which felt a bit like, hello, let the Jews speak about anti-Semitism. Other Jewish MPs did speak, but so I think the thing is, for me, I think there's two really big political things about anti-Semitism. Is that anti-Semitism is hatred in whatever form against Jews and Jewish people, and that we need to stamp that out in any form, and we need to ensure we're protecting and supporting Jewish people, and we've got the right legislative framework to do that, and the right definitions and all the rest of it. But the other thing is that your political values should never be any way inhibited by the fact that you're Jewish, or the fact there may be other people with, say, economic ideas who are also anti-Semitic, and then you say those economic ideas are not legitimate because that person also is anti-Semitic. We haven't stopped letting children read Roald Dahl's books because Roald Dahl was an anti-Semite, and there are others, who may be slightly less publicly known about their anti-Semitic views, where we haven't effectively cancelled them and all their work because of it. So, and the same goes for maybe, political or economic ideas. So, I'm a democratic socialist. I believe in those values, believe in Labour values, and went through a difficult period where some people in the Jewish community would say, how can you be connected to this party or believe those things, nothing to do with being Jewish? How can you believe in, I don't know, I don't want to give an example really, particularly now in government, but whatever it is, which has nothing to do with being Jewish, and and be a part of the Labour Party. I don't, that really annoyed me. And the other thing is that, and this is the thing with Layla, is Israel, and particularly the Israeli government, is not an articulation of Jewishness. Particularly the current Israeli government, although it's completely fracturing at the moment because of thankfully, we've managed to finally get a ceasefire in Gaza, which I've supported pretty much from the first day the IDF entered Gaza in October last year. Yeah, October last year. So basically, the views of the Israeli government do not represent Jews and Judaism. They represent a political strand in Israel, which are Jews. I'm not denying they are, but every populist right, hard right political strand in the country represents a strand of opinion in that country. That's what it represents. It doesn't represent all of those people everywhere, or even all of those people in that country. It certainly doesn't. So that is difficult. That's a difficult thing to deal with. And there's also a slight difficulty in and some expectation amongst some Jewish people, even if they are, I don't know, moderate, politically moderate, and they don't agree with the Israeli government, that you have to articulate very strong support for Israel because other people are attacking Israel. If the Israeli government doing something wrong, I feel absolutely legitimately I need to say they're doing something wrong. And I think that holding back actually is undermining the state of Israel itself, because the state of Israel needs to survive as a democracy. Anything it does which is undemocratic or isn't in keeping with progressive values needs to be called out. So and I feel very strongly about that. And I think there's so many examples recently that we probably don't need to dive into that too deeply.
Alex, can I ask you, I mean, where we're kind of coming towards the end of the interview, and it's been so fascinating what you've been talking about. Do you think it's possible, and what do you think those of us on the outside of Parliament can do, maybe particularly from as psychologists, therapists, to support a move towards a more kind of compassionate politics, kind of caring politics, to support a kind of progressive politics I guess since you really stand for, which is about people looking after each other, about
Yeah, yeah.
communities, about cooperation. How do we get involved?
Yeah, I think what's probably helpful, because you're obviously professionals and experts in your area, is to point out where either whether it's the way that the Parliament operates, Westminster operates, or the general political environment. And we've seen some really bad examples last summer, for instance, with the disturbances, which were political in nature, for honest, which are I don't know how best to say this, psychologically uh, unhealthy, or whatever the professional term is. You probably could term it much better than me, and it are effectively how that is hurting our democracy and leading us. I mean, we have this huge attack on democracy from populist forces right around democratic world. And some of that, I'm going to get into this a bit deeper, some of that is internal and domestic and involves directly those people, who are involved in it, and their parties and outriders, so examples of that in this country, people like Tommy Robinson, Andrew Tate, and all of those sort of people. But actually some of it is quite nefarious outside influence by transnational actors, state actors, Russia being the biggest one by far, but not just them, quite a lot, and some of them in quite niche ways, and people aren't probably really aware. But we've had lots of reporting recently about a number of countries and how they operate. And so, although I don't want you to get into that because that's probably not your area of expertise, but you saying that that things culturally are unhealthy and a threat to democracy, that's helpful, because you as a professional and a health professional are much better trusted than me as a politician saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we see that, what you're talking about those threats on democracy do have a psychological dimension. Often it's an inability to, I guess the word we use is mentalize, to think about other people. It's where people get so locked into one perspective, whether that's about their particular community or their particular way of seeing
Yep.
the world, that they lose that ability to stand back,
Yep.
see a bigger picture, understand that other people have feelings as well, and that everybody is a human being.
And I think with social media, there's definitely an element of content being produced, which is psychological manipulation. It's a form of political gaslighting, really, and people get sort of stuck into these mindsets. And you can see it all the time, and pushing of conspiracy theories. This is really, the area of misinformation and disinformation, and how it's psychologically rewiring people into those mindsets is like a really concerning thing, and probably could do a whole podcast on that on its own. But it's like that's something that really I run the all party group, what chair one of the groups chair the all party group on fair elections, and it's about changing our voting system, which is quite a standard thing which we can talk about, but also it's about dark money in politics, so paying for some of these things, and then about misinformation, disinformation. And actually the final aim of these transnational actors and internal actors as well, but they're less good at it, but the transnational actors particularly, because they're state funded, is to rewire people, how people think. And if you look at a country like Russia, they've done that internally. So if you look at Russians and you speak to them about the war in Ukraine, that they obviously are in a slight information vacuum in terms of the entire world, but their view on it is that they are the victims, and effectively this was the West and Ukraine's attack on Russia, not the other way around. So this is the complete. It's very Orwellian. It's very 1984. What people are told, and so we need. I'm not saying that you need to go and rewire, and that's probably a bit too much of an ask the mentality of Russians. Although that'd be great if somebody could do that. But similar issues here. Because the things could get, I'm afraid to say, quite dark in the future, and we need all the help we can get.
What do you think, Alex, is most important there I mean, as you say, democracy feels so under threat. We've got the environmental crises and, getting worse.
Mm.
What do you think for those of us who want to kind of retain and promote a democratic society? democratic, progressive society which values everybody. What do you think is most important that we need to do together?
I think we need to protect the truth. We need to protect the truth of things and not let either outright lies, conspiracy theories, misinformation, whatever form it takes to become embedded in people's psyches.
Thank you.
I'm aware we're coming to time. I'm just so grateful for the fact that you've been able to join us, Alex, and thank you so much for everything you shared with us. I'm really excited to see how people in our network respond. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you again.
Thanks, Robbie. No, it's been great. It's been really interesting, and I can think about 5 other things we could probably do a podcast on coming off of this. But definitely happy to speak to you in future and to delve into some of these areas in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Amazing. Look forward to it.
Thank you.